Where's that darn karate Jew? They're making us rabbinites look horrible.
If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.
This is my last will, therefore listen carefully to my words.
Shalom, this is Hakam Yara ben-Emmett with the Torah Watchman Show International 501c3 Company Incorporated, doing the first Torah Parshah I've not done in many moons ago. Yes, been very busy, tired from work, excuses, but I want to redo a video I've done probably 4 years ago. Want to redo it. The video is for this Parsha, beginning of the book of Devarim. It's called Devarim, and I have a brief introduction. So if you want to turn along with me, turn to Deuteronomy chapter 1, verses 1 through chapter 3, verse 22. Not too terribly long. The name of this Parsha actually means the words. The name of the words are the last will and testament of Moshe Rabbeinu. You can actually find the key word for the naming convention of this Parsha in chapter 1, verse 1. A brief introduction. By the time the events of Deuteronomy take place on the plains of Moab, we're talking about approximately 3,500 years ago. Moshe is completely alone from his generation. Why? Because most everyone died. His brother and sister recently died. And of course, the 40 years of wandering of the rebellious generations of like Korach and the others, the 12 tribes, 10 of them at least, except for Joshua and Caleb, they committed great rebellion and insurrection against God. So these people literally died out. Moshe is the last of his generation, literally. The last of his generation that survived the entire journey from Goshen, Egypt. So you imagine how alone he may feel. So, as recorded in the Book of Numbers, or Bamidbar, his sister Miriam died in the wilderness of Zin. His brother Aaron died on Mount Hor. Now, in the introduction of this video, I did an AI video centered around the Mount Hor area and right along the east side of the Jordan River, namely Jordan today, which is incidentally occupied territory of land that was given exclusively to the children of Israel. Now Moshe knows his own death is imminent because God has already told him he will not cross the Jordan River. We all know why. He lost his temper. He impugned his witness. He brought shame to God because he was the image of God among the people by losing his temper and striking a rock in anger in front of all the people instead of simply talking to the rock to produce water. That was the sin, per se, that he was being punished before. But I think God had that in mind, but there were other reasons, and I'll get to that later, why Moshe was not allowed to go into the promised land with the rest of tribal Israel. The tribal Israel of his time, of the time of the writing of Devarim, were none other than Generation X. It's the children of the rebellious parents and grandparents that died in the desert. Within the specific context, Deuteronomy functions beautifully as a formal succession document and the final testament. Like the last will and testimony. When you go before an executor of your estate and you know that you only have 6 months of life left, you may be in a hospice situation or soon to go there, terminal cancer or something like that, and you start probing your mind and thinking about every choice you made that led you up to this point at the end of your life. Moshe was at the end of his life. Some rabbis say, I don't know if it's true, but Devarim was written in the last 6 weeks of his life, nearing his birthday, in which he died on the day of his birthday. Just imagine it. The legacy of Moshe is revered by both Jews and Christians alike. In the Old Testament, the Christians, they hold him of great esteem. The name Moshe is mentioned more predominantly in the Islamic Quran, their holy book, than the name of their greatest prophet, Muhammad. It's very interesting. They hold him in high esteem as well. So we're talking about a greatest of all farewell speeches. And I looked this up about autobiography, where you write your own story about yourself. There's a lot of examples of that out there. But the literary art of writing was much different in ancient Israel's time than it is today. The poems, per se, the poetry, the pentameter of the rise and fall of the words and everything was a lot different. Some people criticize Devarim and other books attributed to Moshe as something was written ambiguous, written in third person, and therefore it could not have been Moses who wrote it. However, a lot of people write today their life story in the same pose or format or layout that we see in the book of Devarim. Devarim essentially is a summation of the previous 3 books before that book. So if you didn't read the other 3 books and you come and you just pick up your Old Testament, wipe off the dust, if you're a Christian or whatever, and you want to get caught up real quick, going to Bible camp or whatever, you read the book of Deuteronomy, you'll know the core of what the other books that we're talking about at a high level. Because it gets into the 613 mitzvot. It also gives you a brief summary of all the holidays in the Jewish calendar. With the siblings gone, his brother and sister gone, and his own time running out, you can picture a hourglass, with the sand drifting down. Moses uses his final days to write down the law codes and deliver his farewell speeches. This ensures that the divine instruction given to him can be passed on to his generation, will survive long after he's gone. And he was very concerned about this. It is his spiritual and legal will for the entire nation of Israel. So you just imagine this. He loved Israel as his own family. One big misspoke. He really did. Even though many of those people were stubborn and wanted to stone him and just very antagonistic. But at this point, what Moshe wanted is to just let it fall as a desert sand. Just let it fall to the wayside, and forgiveness and teshuvah, and just treat them as a loving parent, to admonish them only when it's necessary, to let them know what the blessings are as well. There was a public charge here, a mandate. In Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 7 through 8, Moshe calls out Joshua, forward in the front of Israel, and tells him, "Be strong and courageous, for you shall go with this people into the land." The divine endorsement in Deuteronomy chapter 31:14, God commands Moses and Joshua to appear together at the tent of meeting so that God can personally commission Joshua. The final summary, the second author of the editor, reinforces the exact transition in the final chapter. Noting in Deuteronomy chapter 34 verse 9 that Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hand on him, so that the people of Israel obeyed him. So it's very important to give you in a nutshell, the entire book, what it's about. And the next several weeks we'll be covering the Book of Devarim with various recounts and Parshah each and every week until we wrap up the entire 5 books this year. Before we get started, I want to discuss quickly the subject of mourning, because we're in the month of Tammuz. We're after the 17th of Tammuz, and Orthodox Jews and Karaite Jews alike, and I looked this up, is that they do mourn primarily for the destruction of the walls of Jerusalem back in the final days of Judah, before they were carried off by King Nebuchadnezzar II, and the final destruction of King Solomon's beautiful temple. And this mourning, it goes on about 3 weeks until the next month. But the mourning periods are different based on different denominational constructs of Judaism. In some extreme situation, ultra-Orthodox, they don't even wash their clothes. I mean, they're literally like they're sitting Shiva for someone who died in their home. And that's the way they look. And to each their own. Mourning is good if it's sincere and contrite from the heart, because it produces teshuvah and repentance, and that's where God can really use you. Now, Karaites have a much longer mourning period than their rabbinate brothers. They observe a 3 weeks mourning period. Rabbinates observe a 3 week mourning period. Karaite Jews observe a longer 4.5 week mourning period. It begins on the 1st of Tammuz and culminates in the 10th of Av. So rabbinates begin on the 17th, so it's a little bit shorter than that. And by tradition, people don't get married in Tammuz. Rabbis don't shave their beards. They don't get haircuts. They don't groom themselves so well. And their public witness among the fellow Jews is that they're sorrowful, they're mourning, and they're reminiscing of Israel yesteryear. But I just want to give you a news flash. Israel is doing very well today since 1948, and they transformed the land to the paradise that we have been praying for and waiting for the Mashiach to reveal himself in our days. Israel's walls are reestablished. They have the greatest army and military in the world, I believe, and they stood their own in the various tests. When people around them want to destroy them, the Jew is still there. So when you mourn, rabbis, in your ritualistic prayers and everything else, and I say this to my Karaite brothers and sisters too, when you mourn, it's good to mourn the destruction of King Solomon's temple. But understand that God told Jeremiah, do not mourn, do not cry, do not prostrate yourself, because these are evil people, and they imprison you when I told you to go unto them as my prophet and to warn them about how their action and behavior would lead to absolute destruction and devastation of the temple and Jerusalem, and how they would be carried off as slaves. So I look at this as well in that way. Okay? So there's actually a fast period on the 9th of Tammuz. Rabbinate Jews who fast on the 17th of Tammuz, which is the Roman breach of Jerusalem. This is the second temple. Karaites focus on the first temple. Karaite Jews fast on the 9th of Tammuz, the date that marks the Babylonian breach of Jerusalem wall during the first temple destruction, as explicitly recorded in Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 6. The sunset to sunset fasting, while rabbinates have minor fasts begin at dawn, Karaite fasts, including the 9th of Tammuz, begin the night right after sunset, and they last a total of 24 hours. And it's pretty tough and very restrictive if you have to work full time like I do, and especially at my age, about fasting. But you know, fasting for me is not just going without food. even though there was a lot of fasting, unintentional fasting for the Jews that are trying to survive under siege of King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian swordsmen that came in, that terrible 3 weeks, and destroyed everything. You fasted in many ways of going without, and your mind, you give more of your mind and your heart and soul to God during that period than any other time. Maybe you pray more. You have different kinds of prayers, like the Yom Kippur kind of prayers, of repentance, that kind of thing. So, by our shared tradition, both Karaites and Rabbinites, it's traditionally accepted to mourn the destruction of King Solomon's temple during the month of Tammuz. And this is where we traditionally have the beginning of the first book of Deuteronomy, the first chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, or Devarim. A general overview, this week's reading begins with the fifth and final book or set of scrolls that God gave Moshe to write by his own penmanship down. Moses begins his final monologue 5 weeks before his passing. He recounts the story of the Israelites' travel to the desert, placing emphasis on and rebuking them for the story of the spies. I told you about 12 spies were sent. That was still very much on Moshe's mind. He describes Israel's conquest of the Emorites and the Bashanites too, as well. In the first Aliyah section, the Israelites are situated on the eastern bank of the Jordan River, and I've showed you a picture of this back here, pretty much what it looks like of today. And on the verge of entering the land of Canaan. And Moses' death is very imminent. Like I said, he's just weeks away from his death. This is a setting for Moses' final statement to the nation he lovingly tended, literally with a shepherd's staff, for decades. After delivering a veiled rebuke to the nation, like any loving parent, you have exceptions to your blessings and accommodations and things of that nature. You say, however, you want to actually, when you give someone an A or a B grade, you want to quantify how that grade was measured and why that you got that B instead of an A, that kind of thing. And it is kind of the way Moshe was a loving parent to the children of Israel. Moses goes back in time in his mind and he repeats this. Why did he do this? Because he's talking to an entirely different generation of Jews. I already said before the beginning of this video, is that he is totally alone and he's the last of his generation. He's speaking to a new generation of Jews that may not be as sharp in the mind and may not have contextual reverence of what it meant for God to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt and defeat the greatest army in the Levant, the Middle East, of Pharaoh's army, and lead them across the Red Sea, and all the other miracles of the manna and the quail and Mount Sinai and everything. They did not have contextual reference to that. But since Moshe was the figurehead here, they respected him as an authority figure, and they listened to him. So Moshe revisits his entire period, some 39 years earlier, before the Israelites left Mount Sinai and at God's behest, and the intention of immediately invading and entering Canaan that was short-circuited with the issue with the 12 spies. At that time, Moshe expressed to the Jews his inability to single-handedly bear the burden of leadership, because God has multiplied you, and behold, you are today as the stars in heaven in abundance, just like the covenant promise that God made to Abraham. I think Moshe, after all the people that died, just from natural death and getting old, but also the pestilence from the sin, and everyone else, thousands of people died in the Korach rebellion. And going back to the golden calf, thousands of more people died. But for them to survive the test of all the fighting of these armies and everything else around them, the Amalekites and Canaanites and other people like that, was just nothing short of amazing and a miracle. The second aliyah, after the Israelites consented to the idea, they accepted that Moshe would not be there forever. And I said before, Moshe did not cross, God did not allow him to cross the river Jordan to the other side and lead the children of Israel himself, but told him to dedicate a portion of his power and his blessing, his anointing, to Joshua, to lead them on his benefit. Just like God told the children of Israel, you must leave Mount Sinai, you cannot be here and dwell here forever. Because I am not just the God of one mountain. Well, God is saying the same thing with Moses. When you think about God, stop looking at me. I'm just a human being. I make mistakes like you. I'm not going over with you because I made a mistake. I lost my temper. So God did not want the children of Israel to be so fixated on the man and personality of Moshe indefinitely. He wanted the children of Israel to have an individual, supernatural experience, personal, loving experience with the same God they attribute God of Mount Sinai and the God of Moses. Now Moses recalls instructing them the basics of judicial integrity, the giving of laws, the court system, the appointment of judges. Moses then recounts how the Jews traveled to the desert and quickly reached Kadesh Barnea on the southern border of the Holy Land, how they made their journey. And many people say they didn't even have to change their shoes, that God was providing with them, intently, of everything they had. And the third aliyah, but as the time of the Israelites approached, Moses demanded the right to send out scouts to investigate the land of Canaan. So he recounts the events that took place when the 12 spies, which were liaisons, and some of the probably like ambassadors or leaders within tribal Israel at that time, how they were tasked to go out into the land and search it. Moshe recounts the tragic episode in detail, how the scouts delivered a frightening report, caused the people to panic. Again, it's about public witness. The words have power, folks. Be careful what you say, especially when you misrepresent what God is telling you to do. That, my friend, is taking God's name in vain. All these people claiming the land was uninhabitable. Only Joshua and Caleb claimed they could take the land. And that led to the exile from the land back in the wilderness, going around essentially Mount Sinai back and forth for 40 years. Just imagine that. So despite Moshe's protest, the Israelites adopted the scouts' attitude and decided not to enter Canaan. This caused God to bar the entire generation from entering the promised land, as I mentioned before. In the fourth aliyah, Moses continues. At that time, God instructed the Israelites to reverse course and head back to the desert. Realizing their dreadful error, a group of Israelites proceeded in advance toward Israel. In face of Moses' objections lacking divine protection, they wanted to conquer Canaan by their own means and strength, and not by the spirit and strength of their loving God. They were merely attacked and they were massacred by the Emorites. At this point, the Israelites heeded God's command and headed back to the Sinai desert, feeling like you're totally lost your way, literally, and you're losers, and you made horrible mistakes, and you have to deal with the reality of your decision. God loved them through those 40 years, and hopefully the children learned some truth and wisdom from the rebellious parents and ancestors. And the fifth aliyah, Moses fast forwards 38 years, the generation in which Egypt had perished. now that the children were ready to enter Canaan, but first God instructs the Israelites regarding 3 nations whose land was off limits for them. And I'll tell you why in a moment. The land of Seir, which is Edom, Moab, and Ammon. These lands were the rightful inheritance of the descendants of Esau and Lot. Instead, the Israelites circled these lands and approached the land of Sekhan, the king of the Emorites, a giant, and requested passageway through the land. Sekhan refused the Israelite request. In the 6th Aliyah, he continues to explain. Moshe recounts that Sekhan led the nation in battle, his nation in battle against the Israelites. The Israelites were victorious and they took possession of that land. Only after the fact that God told them not to invade the land because God wanted to respect the blessed memory of Esau and Lot and his descendants, even though they were evil people. But since they went out of the way to make lives miserable for the Israelites and attacked them when they were vulnerable, when they only wanted to walk to the land, they didn't ask anything in return, God allowed Israel, and only then, to attack, kill all their soldiers, destroy them, and take their land away from them. This applies to Israel today, folks. Israel did not declare war against Iran. Iran declared war against them. Israel did not declare war against Hezbollah. They declared war against them. Israel did not declare war against Hamas and the Palestinian people. They declared war against Israel over and over and over again. You connect the dots with this message here in Devarim with what's happening today. Now, the 7th Aliyah, wrapping up this Parshah, Moshe delineates the borders of the lands allotted to the aforementioned tribes, okay? 12 tribes had 12 allotments of land based on the census record of counting on, well, essentially how many people they had, how much they multiplied. Some tribes literally had more people than others, and that's how the land was allocated, and was fairly allocated to them. So he gave these tribes orders to cross in certain areas. This is where you would go, invade that land, and take that land away, and this would be your tribal area to raise your communities and to settle. So, he let them know that you should expect a battle with the Canaanites before returning to the land and settling. So there would be a period of war underneath Joshua and Caleb. After Moshe was dead and gone, there would be battling of that. So it would be much later when they would actually set up their tribal cities, everything that was promised, and like in Bamidbar and other Torah passages here. So Joshua will lead the nation into Israel, is enjoined not to be fearful of the battle which he will face, because it is the Lord your God who is fighting for you. And it's very important, because the people were afraid of these giants. Who wouldn't be? And these are people are much taller than some of the tallest basketball players you know. These people were really, really big and strong. Big people make big bricks that make big walls and big cities and big swords. And this is what they were dealing with. Some people say the sons of Nephilim. Who knows? But this is what they should expect. And Moshe told them the truth. When you go to Canaan, you will be fighting for your life, but I will be fighting for you. And you will trust Joshua, just as you trusted me. He will carry my staff, he will carry my mantle, and he will be endowed with the same spirit that God endowed me these past 38, 39 years. So in conclusion, we have a Haftarah in the book of Isaiah, chapter 1, verses 1 through 27. This week's Haftarah is the third of the series of the Haftarah of affliction. So this is tradition in Talmud, okay? These three Haftarah are read during the 3 weeks of mourning for Jerusalem, between the feast of 17 Tammuz and the 9th of Av. So I hope you enjoyed this Parshah. May the love, joy, knowledge, and peace and truth of this message go forth into you and your family to make the world a better place of learning all about the Torah. Be a Torah defender, do not be a Torah destroyer. Like those people that monkey with the Torah, my Torah, your Torah, and try to add and subtract from it and say, this is my law you should pay attention to, not the laws of Moshe. This Jew won't go there. Anyway, Hakam Yarabin signing out to the next time. Peace. Shalom Aleichem. Take care.